Hello, everyone, and welcome to the photo gallery. I'm so glad you guys are here. So today we're going to have TISIDRA Jones, who's going to be talking about her book, A Guide to Business Inclusion Programs and Government Contract. So without further ado, here's our guest author.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. And so welcome. So I guess I'll start with talking a little bit about why I decided to write this book. And so in terms of my background, I worked in business inclusion programs in government. And I just remember hearing both from businesses who were often saying there's just so much paperwork. I don't know how to navigate this. I don't know how to find the information I need with these certification programs. And then also people who manage the programs in government wondering, well, what are other states or cities doing related to their small business inclusion and diverse business inclusion programs? And so I decided when I was a few years younger with even more energy and no children that I would want to jump into researching the laws across all 50 states, as well as a major city in each state. To be able to figure out, so what are some of the key elements of the business inclusion programs that exist, and how it could be a tool for businesses navigating those programs. And so this book is intended to be something that could be used by lawyers who may work with businesses, but also chambers of commerce, businesses, and government employees to kind of get a sense of what's out there. And so I know what some book signings folks will read from their books. A lot of this is step one, get this paperwork together. Step two, this is what you need to have in place that's required for your certification. And so what I'll do more so is give some overviews from some of the key chapters. So in the book, really recommending that people read chapter 1, which starts with some of the history of these programs, but also the federal government type of components of things for people to keep in mind with the certification. And so the book starts out providing an overview. And so really in thinking about small business inclusion programs, I'm a researcher by nature and someone who's big on words having meaning. And so before I worked in government, I'm like, oh, small business, this is the mom and pop shop here, maybe the vendor, not like a multi-million-dollar company. That's not what a small business is necessarily all the time. And so what's interesting and really getting into this field and researching is when you think about what a small business is defined by these programs, it really varies. And so small, first off, for the business inclusion programs, it's based off of industry codes. And so for the Small Business Administration, it's looking at the NICS codes and North American Industry Classification System codes across 18 different specific sectors. And size for a business is based off of the sector. So a small business who's in a professional service marketing company, what's small for them is not going to be the same as what's small for a business in construction. And so what's really interesting with that is how a small business is defined based off of looking at all of the 900 smaller codes defining what those annual gross receipts or number of employees determines what small is. And so in terms of a business's how much money they make in a year, that range based off of these programs in the government is really 2 million to 41.5 million as a small business. And so if you're in professional services or marketing or a solopreneur, it's like 2 million, that's not bad. That would be nice if I was making 2 million a year and I'm a solopreneur. And so that's something I mention in the book to keep in mind for businesses. If you're going to get into competing with others for government contracts, recognize that your pool of small is businesses with 2 million revenue to 41.5 revenue. And so it's important to recognize that so that if you're wanting to understand what programs exist, some states and some cities actually have certifications for businesses that are micro businesses, so smaller than the small. Some cities have created programs across the country, or counties rather, where they will actually look at a specific industry or NICS code, so business that, for example, we could say does calligraphy and an art gallery, a business that is in this particular NICS code related to arts and culture, and say, hey, when we were working in this space, we're seeing from revenue that small is maybe not 2 million, maybe it's even smaller. such that we should have an emerging small business program that defines small differently. So then when we create programs to say, hey, we're going to have this contracting opportunity, this request for proposals go out, and we want to limit it to businesses that are certified as emerging small businesses in calligraphy, that this would be open, so they're only going to compete with other businesses similarly sized. And so these are things for a lot of businesses getting certified where they do all the paperwork, they get certified, and it's like, great, contract opportunities come my way. But you don't usually get a guide that says these are the things to keep in mind. And so this book helps businesses to kind of see, oh, so there are different kinds of aspects of the ways in which these government entities may use this certification or how I may access these opportunities. And so it opens by, as I was saying, explaining what small is, so that people can have a sense of that when you're understanding who you're competing with across the market. The other thing that the first chapter really looks at, I like timelines. I'm kind of a geek for timelines because my grandma used to say, if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. And so I like to understand the history of where things came from and the origins of programs. With a lot of business inclusion programs, people could think about these programs are focused on just diverse different businesses, but the history of these programs really started out as small business programs, with the exception of a very smaller piece before in 1910, which I found while I was researching for the book, which was really interesting. The Buy Indian Act of 1910 actually was an attempt by the government to really promote and have opportunities for contracting preferences for qualified Indian tribes or Native American-owned businesses. But as of we're in 2024, maybe at least 2 years ago, there were people in government within these different agencies still looking to see, is this being enforced or was it ever enforced? Although it was on the books, did it happen? So those were questions, and that's just stuff that was interesting from a research perspective to see when we can create programs and laws, and that's government, people, what have you, what's being enforced, what's available, what do people know exists. And so those are just things that are interesting to look at from a research perspective within the book. So beyond that, once we talk about what small is within these programs, the book actually explains the difference between businesses that are, or programs that exist rather, that are race and gender neutral or race and gender conscious. So small business programs are programs that look at minority and women-owned construction or women-owned contracting programs. And so with those distinctions, there's as a lawyer, there are a lot of other legal things that come into that. And so we're not going to dive into the depths of all of those pieces. And so that's why this was published by the Bar Association. You could read that and the footnotes and look at some of those distinctions, but there are, when you have programs that have different components there. The next thing to keep in mind with the programs, as I was saying, is how to leverage it as a tool. So as you move through and look at some of these different certification programs that exist at the federal level, there are programs that are for economically disadvantaged women-owned business, veteran-owned businesses, service-disabled veteran businesses, different types of certifications. What's important for people in this part as you're going through is that it breaks down what do you need to have in place and who's eligible for these programs. And so it really explains that, it defines each of those key things. With this book being a tool, it's important to kind of look at those definitions. So sometimes we could see, we're gonna be like, great, that makes sense, that's me. But lawyers, these terrible lawyers, terrible people as one, we just complicate things up. And for anybody who may watch this later, I am a lawyer. I'm talking about how law school has trained us to add lots of words to make things
Complicated.
Oh, the audience has jumped in to complicate things. But that's why we have programs that
make things understandable.
Yes, I would say with yes. So the other piece I would say that goes with that is there are things where we are to write things in plain language, and I say we because I am involved a lot in writing different policies and programs, and so it's important to have the language here, but then also ensure people understand what it means once we put it down. And so to that end, as you go through with the eligibility here, it really breaks down some of the key requirements for people. And what's interesting going from state to state is what may qualify a business as a small business in one state or one city is not going to be the same. Same for a woman-owned or a minority-owned business. It varies. And so being able to understand, especially if you live in areas that are states that you work across multiple states. And so each state, each area will have some of its nuances. And if you could qualify across multiple jurisdictions, very important and helpful to understand those differences, and that it doesn't automatically mean you qualify for another, and being able to understand those things. And so those are some of the key things on the front end as we look through some elements of the federal section here. But what I want to hop to is some examples that are useful for businesses as well. In each chapter, there's an additional tools and resource section. And what that does is it helps businesses to be able to see a few key things. One, I think there are a lot of footnotes, and those are helpful because it gives you direct links to websites. So you can find where are contracting opportunities that exist and websites specific to that to help businesses find those. It also provides an additional tools and resources, information related to any type of grants or programs or grants, technical assistance, loan programs, things of that nature that exist specific to these programs, or where they could have a certification for a small business. And if you're certified, then you might be able to access more of those resources. And so I think that section is something that could be really helpful for business owners who may be looking to address access to capital issues or finding capital to bridge. There's information for that in each jurisdiction if it existed. And so an example to that end is there's at least one state while we were doing the research that they have a large suite of loans available to businesses that are certified businesses. And so the first step in their qualification for their loan programs or their grant program is that you have to be certified as the designation within the state. And so that's something that is a great resource for businesses, especially outside of doing the work that we do here in my company and team. We've been involved in a lot of listening sessions with business owners and a lot of research related to access to capital issues for small and diverse businesses. And so if there's an opportunity to find resources that can help have cash that can float, especially when issues of prompt payment may exist on different kinds of contracts or delays in payment for some rather, then that stuff that's available as resources to help businesses find that throughout the book as well. Yeah, and so a couple other things that I'll highlight here too, and looking at different states would be things like bidding preferences. And so some states have in place where if you are a certified business, that you would be able to get a particular preference from bidding. And what that looks like is if I'm just going to keep picking on you with the gallery.
That's fine.
and I'll say hypothetically I were an artist as well or sorts, but if we both were to respond to an opportunity and you were certified and I was not, that some jurisdictions could have a bidding preference where even if I came in a little bit less than you, but you were within 5% of the cost that I said, hey, this is going to cost $10,000. You're within 5% of that, even though it was more, and you were certified, then there could be a preference to go with your company as opposed to mine because you meet these qualifications. And so those are also things when businesses get certified and working with them, they're like, great, I'm certified. Again, those are things some may not be aware of or possibilities, and to look at this as a guide to help understand some of those things. And so I'll stop for a second to see if there are any questions.
So my question is, the person who's not qualified or doesn't have the qualifications, are you always competing against them even if you've been certified?
So in the example that I just did, if you're the person who's not certified,
right,
you're asking if you're always going to be competing against
other people who are not
certified. Not always. And so in some jurisdictions, they might do what are considered sheltered market programs. And what those look like is that they would not set aside, but they would separate out rather, that there are particular contract opportunities specific for businesses, we can say in construction, because you see a lot. So we'll say construction, this is going to be a particular construction type of project. It's under $100,000, which that's a very small project, but under $100,000, and in this pool, we're only going to have certified businesses who are competing against other certified businesses.
Okay.
So those type of sheltered market opportunities could be designated just so businesses that are in that particular group are only competing against other similar situated. However, outside of those instances, if you decided to go for regular RFP or request for proposals that were posted to compete, and it's not something that's designated as one of those type of opportunities, then you would be competing with that $2 to $41.5 million range.
Oh, okay.
Other businesses who are small. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Other any other questions before I say a few more things?
Not this one.
Okay. And so those are just a few examples there. Some other things that stick out in looking at some jurisdictions, which we were talking about a little bit before, some of the micro business opportunities. Sometimes you could have opportunities that are designated just for other micro businesses. And so you would compete with ones who are the smallest of the small. Other things that come up within the certification. So the book also will break out for programs that do set goals. So sometimes contracting goals are set when you have public funds and you're saying, hey, so we have this I'll say construction again because there's just a lot of construction. Have this construction opportunity that's come up. And so as a result, we're going to put some goals on this construction project to make sure that we're including other small and diverse businesses within this. And so those goals could have a certain percentage that are included for the contracting, and the prime on those projects has to make sure they're hitting those goals. But the book also highlights that sometimes the government entity itself may have a particular aspirational goal to spend a certain amount with small businesses for a given year. So that type of information related to what's set there is also noted, but also things related to requirements for prompt payment. So ensuring that anybody who's at that first level, whenever they get paid by the entity, they need to ensure that they're paying their subs within a certain amount of time as well. And so there's some examples where some states have really taken the time to create data dashboards to highlight when they aren't paying promptly, or if a prime contractor isn't, that there could be a penalty and their interest could accrue. And so what we've seen with some entities taking that level of transparency higher is that they post a dashboard that says, hey, we didn't do our job, and we're going to show you how much we paid out and who we had to pay to because we didn't do this job. And they'll go a step further to include resources. If you're a subcontractor and you haven't been paid, here are some resources to help you if you're in that kind of instance. And so that kind of information by jurisdiction is also noted as well as another tool, because sometimes smaller businesses, if you're a sub, it's really hard because business is a matter of relationships. And so you don't want to say, hey, like, I'm going to tell you that this prime here isn't paying us and we need capital to float and we're struggling because we still need to get business later and it's been 120 days. And so being able to have resources to help in that time is something that can be helpful for business. And some states have resources that are better than others, and some of those tools are included as well.
Another question based on what Ms. Lisa stated, but with regards to when a business isn't granted that capital or whatever, do they get feedback as to why they don't get approved for the funding, or why they're outbidded or not, accepted in the bid? Like, do they get that feedback, or is it kind of left to them to just kind of figure it out, or maybe get someone else to help out with that information?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so, in terms of what you were saying, is there an opportunity where a contractor bids and they don't win the contract? Can they get feedback? And so some entities have debriefing processes in place that they put their process out there so people know how to find out, like, oh, I didn't get this. This is how I can find out and get information. Others don't put their debriefing process out there. And what you just shared is something that we've heard from a lot of businesses of, hey, I just want to do my job well. And if I could learn what I could have done better, it would be really helpful. And so big picture, you can request data with the government and say, hey, I would love to see this. And you can go through a formal process. For entities who have spelled out their debriefing process. For others, they may have that posted online or in the request for proposal. If you aren't awarded this contract, you can contact this office and this project manager to be able to have a debriefing where we'll go through the strengths or weaknesses based off of this very objective rubric and give people that kind of feedback. Or you could request the winning proposal once that's come out to see what that looked like as well. And some entities, depending on jurisdiction, I could speak to some of the states where we've worked. That's what some businesses will do. Oh, great! Now I can see what the winning proposal look like and see the difference and kind of learn from there. So that does.
But how often do you think that actually happens? Like, if you look across the jurisdictions, right, across the states and stuff like that. I mean, in terms of likelihood for them to have it versus not having that kind of formal process in place, because I think that truly is a gap, right?
So, yes, I think that, and this is with my hat as someone who's worked in government. I think there are a lot of really excellent people who are in government who are there to make a difference and try to help. And then you have it's a resource problem of just like time and people and capacity. It's not that people don't want to, it's a matter of resources for a lot of entities to say, if you all are putting out tons of RFPs a month or a week, and if you get, for one particular contracting opportunity, say you get 100 different responses and you're only going to award to one, and then you multiply that times like 100 in a month, just in your department only has 7 people. So then it's that balance of those pieces. So I wanted to name that first, of that recognition for folks. And secondly, it's some have it in place where it's easy for people to find, and some don't. And how often it happens, from spending the last 7 years engaging small businesses across multiple jurisdictions in construction and professional services, I would say from at least the last round we did, over 80% of the smaller businesses don't know where to find the process. And so they don't know, and often when we do the survey of what would help you in a guidebook of working with an entity, having debriefings is often in the top 8 to 10 of things that people say would be really helpful to know how to find it and where to find it. And so that's gap and an opportunity. And some entities have started putting out tools and guidebooks that help people find that. I know some that actually put in their request for proposals the language like you just asked, like if you were unaware, this is how you could request a debriefing. And then some entities have gone one step further in instances where they've done like a sheltered market, and if of the people in the room, one person's awarded, they'll email everybody to say, hey, it's been awarded, and if you want a debriefing, this is how you request it. So that's being more proactive for people to know how to find it.
Because I mean, you have it. To me, it almost sounds like there are 2 kind of layers, right? You have like the major general contractors that win these massive projects, right? And then you have a bunch of subs that fall underneath that, right? So even at the government entity level, if they don't have resources, they can also kind of make it a requirement of the generals to kind of be able to provide some level of transparency to the subs, right? Because I think that the smaller guys suffer so much more than the big guys. The big guys have the cash flow to carry them, but the small guys, they just don't.
And so with what you were just saying, especially with the cash flow piece, I think that's where the efforts where people are really pushing and enforcing the prompt payment, not just saying we require that you pay folks promptly, but giving the smaller subs resources and tools to navigate when they aren't, that's really important, because I've seen more times than I can count when I was working in government, really, really great small businesses grow really big, really fast, but then their payment was delayed because they're a second tier sub or a fourth tier sub that it's just, you're so far down the pipeline that by the time you're getting paid, you just didn't have the cash flow. And so there are, to that end, grants and loan programs that exist to help, but it's kind of people knowing it exists to be able to help with those moments. So,
Good question.
very great questions. Any other questions? At that point, well, I guess the prompt payment and the debriefings were good examples to share. A couple other things I will highlight here too, as I look at some examples. So some other things too, besides bidding preferences too, are resident preferences that exist, and that's regardless of whether you're small or diverse, what have you. Different states have preferences to say, hey, if I live in state A and you live in state B, that they're going to give a preference to the businesses that are in a given state. Sometimes when defining what a local business or a business that will get that preference, different states have different things that they'll look at. Sometimes some things that stood out while we were doing the research that was interesting is different jurisdictions that required to ensure that you've been paying your taxes in this state for a certain amount of time, that you've lived here for a certain amount of time, to really get that benefit. And the nuances of what was required within that was just very interesting to be able to see, so that somebody might just think, because I live here, I automatically should be getting this outcome. Again, it's the importance of understanding how is this defined and what are the requirements of this for people. And as the gentleman said here, the lawyers are doing a good job to make sure it's clear for folks to be able to understand those nuances too throughout the book. And so those are just a couple other examples of things to think about that I think stand out for me. And then another thing I'll highlight too are incentives that exist. One state had a tax incentive actually for prime contractors that subcontracted with certified businesses. And that was something that was interesting to see, because I didn't see that across other jurisdictions, where if a prime could demonstrate as they're filing that they did have subcontracting opportunities to different small and diverse businesses that they had contracted with, that there was a particular tax credit or incentive for them. And so really to try to drive that support of their small businesses in their state was actually very interesting. And I didn't see that in any other states at the time I was conducting the research. And we'll give the disclaimer too, as any person who writes would. At the time I researched this, that's policies and programs are a point in time. So anything, let's be clear. And so things could change. Anytime you change a leader, you change an elected official, administration, laws, programs, policies can change. And so this was a timestamp at the time we researched, and much could have changed in the last year since, and much could change in the year to come or the years to come based off of that. But this is a baseline for people to consider as they look at what they have in place. So, yeah, so those are some of the key highlights and takeaways. My hope would be that people who were able to use this is that it could be a tool to help them learn how to navigate these programs, but also that it's a tool. I'm big on civic education and civic understanding for people, because like I said, my grandmother was a civics teacher, and she's like, you need to be engaged with what's happening in your community. And I think we can often think about what's happening at federal levels, but a lot of what's happening in your local community with your local policies and programs is important for the businesses here. And so being able to look at this to see what exists in your jurisdiction and what you can ask more about, but also what you can, if there's something here that you think this is good for our community, ensure that it's there. Ensure that if something's changed since this was there, that you do that work and connect with your other community members to see what's needed for it to be there, or spark wherever you land on the spectrum, well-informed civic dialogue and civic advocacy for what's important for your communities is the hope. So that's all I have.
That's very good. Excellent.
So where can we purchase the book? And your information as well.
Oh, thank you very much. And so you could purchase the book on Amazon, or you can purchase it from the American Bar Association. It's available there online. And then in terms of more information about me, so you can purchase it on Amazon or at the American Bar Association online. And so in terms of more information about me and my company, I'm the CEO of Strong Starlike Consulting Inc. And so we work with organizations doing a lot of work to help build out guides and tools and engage communities and help to create policies and programs and manage those, and working with community and large entities, including government entities. And so you can find out more about us, www.strongandstarlike.com. That's where you can find out more. So thank you very much.
Yay!
Excellent.
Thank you.